Hello everyone. Welcome to the CFPR weekly seminar series. Today it's our great honor to invite Dr. Angran Li from New York University, Shanghai to give us an interesting talk. Let me briefly introduce our speaker today. Dr. Angran Li is assistant professor of sociology at NYU Shanghai. His research focuses on the mechanisms through which social, spatial, and temporal contexts independently or jointly lead to the inequality of parental practices and educational outcomes. He explores how these relationships affect the intergenerational transmission of advantages and disadvantages across social groups and the national context from a comparative perspective. His research has been published in many top journals, such as Social Forces, Sociology of Education, Social Science Research, Chinese Sociological Review, and among others. So his topic today is socioeconomic stress or family resilience, heterogeneous treatment effects of parental absence on child well-being in China. So so we're very looking forward to this talk. Angran, please. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for Senhu. I just apologize, my internet connection is unstable. So just in case I lose my connection, I will rejoin. So I'm truly apologize for that. I will share my screen first. Okay, can you see my screen? Okay. Okay, so hello everyone. Thanks for coming to my talk. I really thank for Senhu's invitation, and I'm really honored to give this talk at an NUS CFPR seminar. And the topic of my presentation today is socioeconomic stress or family resilience, the heterogeneous treatment effects of parental absence on child well-being in China. Okay, so first, I'm going to talk about the outline for today's presentation. So I will first talk about the theoretical backgrounds and highlight the research puzzles. Then I will discuss the methodology and the results. We'll talk about the implications and conclusions at the end. So I have to say this paper is still in the work in progress. Actually, I've been rejected many times, at least 3 times. So I would really love to hear your feedback and critiques. So please ask any difficult questions you want to ask later in the Q&A section. Okay, so first, we're going to talk about the causes of parental absence. The self-selection process really matters for family instability. There are several different reasons leading to parental absence, as we know, including parental death, divorce, and migration. In the poor developing countries, including countries in Africa, parental death is a major type of parent-child separation. In Western societies, parental absence is often the result of marital dissolution or incarceration, especially in the United States. In other developing countries with booming economy, such as China and India, children are being left behind since parents migrate for economic reasons. So overall, the causes of parental absence is really complex and seems to be related to its effects on children's outcomes. And then so the puzzle is clear here, right? So parental absence matters for whom? From the homogeneous effects perspective, we kind of know that a large amount of the research shows significant and negative impacts of parental absence on children's cognitive, social, and behavioral outcomes. And from the heterogeneous effects perspective, however, scholars report that the negative effects of parental absence are significantly weaker for minority students, particularly for African-American students and Hispanic students who often experience more socioeconomic disadvantages and stressful family events in American context, right? So we don't have a lot of knowledge about this heterogeneous effects in other contexts, especially in the different countries. So the question is how to understand this effect heterogeneity of parental absence in different social contexts across the different national contexts. So So there's two potential explanations for the sources of effect heterogeneity for parental absence. The sociological literature has highlighted the socioeconomic stress theory, which emphasized the impacts of structural constraints in producing different individual outcomes. So for disadvantaged children, parental absence is one of many stressful life events encountered during their childhood, rendering the effects of parental absence less disruptive and detrimental because they already been disadvantaged in their outcomes. On the other hand, some scholars, particularly family scholars and educational psychologists, think family resilience can explain why parental absence may have different influences. Family resilience is the capacity of a family as a functional system to sustain and advance children's well-being, even encountering disruptive events and stressful social contexts. So these two theories are not mutually exclusive. However, the socioeconomic stress theory focuses on the structural constraints, while the family resilience emphasizes the individual responses as active human agency. So the literature also highlights two important mechanisms of family resilience that helps to explain the heterogeneous effects of parental absence. The literature has shown that the extended family supports can mitigate the negative impacts of parental absence, since living with the grandparents can compensate for disadvantages in parents' socioeconomic resources and the benefit for children's educational outcomes. Okay, so on the other hand, parental involvement and engagement matters. Research shown that a great level of parent-child communication is associated with a higher level of life and school satisfaction and happiness for life-behind children in China, for example. So this is kind of what we know about the family resilience. It's already been talked about in the literature, but people rarely use the family resilience as a theoretical perspective to explain this, right? So we have two mechanisms that are really important in this study want to examine. Okay, so based on the above discussion, I kind of examined the two hypotheses that help to explain the effect heterogeneity of parental absence. First, based on the socioeconomic stress hypothesis, children who are most likely to experience parental absence may experience weaker negative impacts than children who are least likely to be raised in families in which parents are absent from home. So this is kind of a complex sentence to understand, but the central argument that is for children who are most likely to grow up in the family with parental absence, right? So their effects will be weaker because they already experience a lot of disruptive and stressful life events, and also their outcomes already been lower compared to the other children. So the parental absence may not actually have a huge impact because they already been have worse outcomes. So second, the family resilience theory suggests that the parent-child communication and extended family supports can mitigate the negative effects of parental absence. If you're thinking from another perspective, how to think of this is, given different levels of parental communication, we will anticipate to examine the different effects of parental absence, right? So at the higher levels of communication, we will anticipate a lower level of negative impacts for parental absence. The same for extended family supports. If you're living with grandparents, if the children living with their grandparents, so the parental absence will be less detrimental because it provides the safety net to safeguard the children's development. Right? This is from the family resilience hypothesis. So the central game of this study is trying to examine these two hypotheses at the same time. So you see, it's kind of ambitious goal, and all the reviewers don't like this kind of ambitious goal because I try to combine these two hypotheses into one study, right? To examine one thing is the selection, another thing is the resilience. How we're going to reconcile these two mechanisms into one study is a question. Maybe we cannot do that, but I'm trying to do that in this one study. Okay, let me know what you think in the Q&A section. I would love to hear your thoughts. Okay, so before we get into the data method section, I would like to talk a little bit more about the socio-demographic transitions in China. And for many of you might already have a knowledge about China. So this might not be an unnecessary content, but I would love to talk about this. Some of you may not actually familiar with what is actually happening in China. So I would like to discuss the demographic transition, including the rising divorce rate, massive parental migration, and the intergenerational supports. And I hope to provide some new insights to understand the research background. But also we have some kind of a different understanding about the socio-demographic transitions in China, especially today's transition. Okay, so first, we kind of know that over the past several decades, the divorce rate was increasing dramatically in China. However, when comparing to other countries, like this graph shows, the divorce rate in China is relatively lower, right? This is largely because a different self-selection process is happening in China. So women are more vulnerable in divorce, especially given the patriarchy system in China. So even though the parents want to get divorced because they need to consider a lot of things like economic dependency or their children. So even though the marriage has been already broken, they still now get divorced, right? This is kind of the way how the Chinese family is operating still in these days. But we see this rising divorce rate. So this will definitely going to influence the effects of parental absence. And as is shown in the CEPS analytical sample, which is the data I used, is called the China Educational Panel Survey. Only 6.6% of children whose parents are divorced, right? It's not that kind of high. Well, if you compare to the other countries like US, and according to the national statistics, more than 30% of the children who grew up in the US were experienced parental divorce during their childhood. So this is a different kind of a contrast across a different social context. And second is, along with economic development, China has witnessed a massive migration flow. This is a kind of knowledge everyone knows. For example, in 2018, which is 5 years ago, for example, there were nearly 280 million migrant workers, which was more than 80% of the US population, if you think of the magnitude. So this will have tremendous influence on Chinese families. A new trend which I want to highlight here is more than 100 million children were influenced by parental migration because due to the economic reasons, right? So not just for divorce, or maybe combined with divorce and the economic reasons. So the literature has paid a lot of attention on the disadvantage of the rural left behind children. Well, we see the number of urban left behind children is increasingly dramatically over the past few years. So this population has been given a less attention in the literature, but also it's quite important. So this study wants to not only look at rural students, but also combine it with urban students to look at how the parental absence impacts their outcomes. Okay, so finally, if you see because the parental migration, right? So the parental migration links to the intergenerational supports in China. As we see in the CEPS analytical sample, more than 30% of the children are living with their grandparents. It suggests that the family is a dynamic system that can respond to the changes due to parental migration. The reason that parents can leave their children behind is because the grandparents become responsible and can take care of their children. Right? You see that shift into the family dynamics is quite unique for the Chinese context, but this is kind of the knowledge that everybody knows, familiar with the Chinese context. Overall, we see that more than 10% of the children grew up in the families where both their parents are absent from home, given the data that we have, which creates a large vulnerable population. And it is the focus of this study. So I'm trying to look at the families whose both parents are absent from home, because this is the most vulnerable group of the students, given our situation here. So next, I would like to talk about the data and the methods. So I use data, which you already know is China Educational Panel Survey, which is collected by the National Survey Research Center at the Renmin University of China. The CEPS is a large-scale nationally representative longitudinal data. The CEPS employed a stratified multi-stage sampling design and randomly surveyed the 7th graders in the mainland China during the 2013-14 academic year. So, so far there's 2 waves of data public available. So you can, if you're interested in this data set, you can go to the website and download it and try to explore some new topics. So the analysis focuses on the 2013-14 and the 2014 and the 15 academic years. So it's using 2 waves of data. So the final sample size is 8,908 students. The analysis is adjusted by the CEPS sampling weights. And for missing cases, I use multiple imputation by chain equations to impute the missing values to increase the reliability and the validity of the data. For measurements, the dependent variables include 4 variables, which include cognitive ability, interpersonal skills, depression, and delinquent behaviors. The treatment variable is parental absence, which is the treatment group that both father and mother absent from home. This is one limitation of this study. I have to notify here, since it overlooks the differential impacts of maternal and the paternal absence, which I really hope to address this limitation in a separate study. I also got the reviewers' comments back. There's one journal, the reviewers really want to push to that direction, look at a different, the maternal and the paternal absence is different. But I have so much things going on in one paper, right? So we have, I want to examine socioeconomic stress theory and also resilience theory. Then if you combine the maternal and the paternal absence in the one paper, it's going to be a huge paper. So I have a dilemma to make decisions which direction I want to go, but I would love to hear your thoughts about this. So I also include a rich set of control variables, including the child parents, family characteristics, and the school factors. Okay, to save time, I won't go over the measurements in details, but if you have any questions, you can ask in the Q&A section about the measurements of the variables. Okay, so next is the methods. So for analytical strategies, there are 2 steps I want to emphasize. So the first, I use inverse probability weighted linear regression adjustment to estimate the doubly robust effects of parental absence. So since the model requires either the conditional mean model or the propensity score model to be correctly specified, so it is considered as doubly robust. All the analyses are based on the ignorability assumption. If you're familiar with the ignorability assumption, which means there's no omitted variable bias, this is a kind of naive assumption, but it's essential to make that assumption when we try to estimate the effects of parental absence, especially the heterogeneous effects of parental absence. Okay, so for the second step, to examine the heterogeneous treatment effects, a non-parametric model to smooth the variation in the individual treatment effects is used to explore the pattern of heterogeneity as a function of propensity score. If you're familiar with these methods, it's been conducted by Yu Xie over the past decade, I think, to look at the heterogeneous treatment effects. So the non-parametric model I'm using is a kernel smoothing methods. To smooth the curve, you can see how the effects of parental absence vary by different levels of propensity scores. And also, I also examined the local average treatment effects for different groups by levels of parent-child communication and whether child is living with his or her grandparents or not. So this is a way to examine the heterogeneous effects of, based on the family resilience hypothesis. So 2 steps. Okay, so next is the results. So first, you're going to see the results is the mean comparison, very straightforward, between the treatment and the control groups. As expected, the results show statistically significant differences in children's outcomes between the treatment and the control groups in terms of parental absence status. So without accounting for other factors, children whose both parents are absent from home have significantly lower cognitive ability and interpersonal skills and higher levels of depression and delinquent behaviors. And families that both parents are absent from home also tend to have a lower level of parent-child communication, and children from those families are more likely to live with their grandparents. And next is the report. I'm trying to report the results from the logistic regression to predicting parental absence. And it's showing the same model to use to calculate the propensity score, right? So the logistic regression to predicting parental absence. So the left columns shows that the row coefficients, and the right-hand side reports the AME. What AME means is the average marginal effects, which is the change in the predicted probabilities of parental absence. I'm trying to compare the AME because it's on the same matrix. So you can compare the probabilities change for one particular variable, independent variable, because it's the same metric ranging from 0 to 1, right? So you can instantly tell which variable has the bigger impacts on parental absence, right? So as shown in the results, parental divorce and the child care support from grandparents are mainly associated with parental absence as expected. So net of other background factors. It indicates a complex self-selection process is happening for parental absence. So usually when people study the effects of parental absence, especially given the Chinese literature, you can look at it as they only focus on parental migration, right? Migration for economic purposes. They're trying to hold the sample to the sample restriction for families or intact families, so the parents are married. But as we know that the divorce and the migration are two different reasons to cause the parental absence. So I'm trying to modeling the two different reasons in the same model, which actually got a lot of criticism from the reviewers that, hey, you can't do this because there's a highly correlated reasons among divorce and migration. And also this is one of the limitations for the data. I have to say that because in the data, I cannot distinguish if the parents divorce first or the migrant first, right? I cannot tell the sequence of the events. So that's why you're creating problems for this kind of the model. So, but I would love to hear your thoughts on this, right? So how you gonna reconcile these different reasons into one model to predicting parental absence in China? Because you can see that the divorce and also the grandparent support and also migration is the driving forces to cause parental absence. Okay, so so next is to look at this homogeneous effects, right? So it's a doubly robust estimates of parental absence, consistent with the previous research, right? So this is not surprise findings. The results show that the parental absence significantly decreases children's cognitive ability and interpersonal skills, and it increases their depression skill and delinquent behaviors, right, as expected. And also you can see that if we compare the ATE, which is the average treatment effects, and versus the ATT, which is the average treatment effects on the treated. On the treated means we look at the effects only for people who experience parental absence. So you compare the ATE and ATT, we see that the ATE are greater than the ATTs. So suggesting that the exposure to parental absence is less detrimental for students who actually indeed experienced parental absence. So it suggests that the effect of parental absence may vary by different levels of propensity score. That is the indication of how strongly the selection happening behind the scene, right? So we can tell that there's definitely effect heterogeneity going on here, but the job is trying to detect this heterogeneity effects, the patterns of heterogeneity effects. Okay, so next is I want to show this the heterogeneous treatment effects of parental absence into one graph. So I present this graphic illustration about how the effects of parental absence vary by the propensity scores. The x-axis indicate the propensity score for parental absence, and which is the predicted probabilities for both parents being absent from home. And the y-axis suggests the effects of parental absence, which is just the effects or doubly robust estimator. Sorry, and also the shaded areas. You see the shaded areas represent 95% confidence intervals. And the results show that the children with low propensities for parental absence are most negatively affected by the events, while children whose both parents are most likely to absent from home, experiencing weaker negative influences. You can see in the graph that is on the right-hand side, you see that the line and the shaded area are crossed with the 0, means the effects become insignificant. If you look at the lower level propensity score, it is significant. That means for the people who are least likely to experience parental absence, the effects are more negative. And this is consistent with the predictions based on the socioeconomic stress theory, right? So the selection for the kids who already been disadvantaged, the parental absence, the effects is not that kind of great, not kind of large, big for them, because they already been experiencing a lot of disadvantage. They already have a lower level of cognitive ability, interpersonal skills, a higher level of depression skills, and delinquent behaviors. And the next is to examine how the mechanisms of family resilience contribute to the varying effects of parental absence. So I show the local average treatment effects by levels of parent-child communication and whether child is living with his or her grandparents or not. On the left-hand side, you will see the results show that the negative impacts of parental absence on children's social, psychological, and behavioral outcomes are significantly smaller for children who are living with their grandparents. Right, so living with their grandparents do actually provide some safety nets, especially for their behavioral and the mental health, behavioral skills and mental health. However, the negative effects of parental absence on cognitive ability are stronger for children who are living with their grandparents. So the living with their grandparents doesn't help to promote their cognitive ability. On the right-hand side, we see that the parent-child communication significantly mitigates the negative influences of parental absence on children's developmental outcomes. However, the parent-child communication does not significantly alter the negative impacts on children's interpersonal skills, which is the top right corner. You see that the effects, we see that there's no significant differences among the low and middle and high level of parent-child communication to look at the effects of, on the interpersonal skills. Right, so there's some kind of so consistent with family resilience theory, but vary by different children's outcomes. Okay, so the next step is to try to combine these two together, right? So combine the heterogeneous treatment effects by different levels of propensity score and by different levels of parental communication, parent-child communication, and the living arrangements. So the analysis further show how heterogeneous treatment effects of parental absence based on the levels of propensity score vary by parental-child communication and multi-generational living arrangement. You can thinking from a traditional estimation strategy, this is a three-level interaction, right? This is three-level interaction effects. Overall, we see that the similar patterns here. So these results indicate that both socioeconomic stress theory and the mechanisms of family resilience can help to explain the variation in the effects of parental absence on children's outcomes, especially under Chinese context, right? You see that kind of patterns are hold across a different situation, but we also see there's some kind of a interesting finding that for the heterogeneous treatment effects vary by different outcomes. So for depression and delinquent behaviors, the living arrangements doesn't actually alter this heterogeneous, the ATEs, which I call this heterogeneous treatment effects, but it actually altered the effects on cognitive ability and interpersonal skills, right? So this is, it really shows you the complex patterns behind the scene. Okay, so to conclude, based on the results, we can draw two conclusions. So first, children whose both parents are most likely to be absent from home experiencing weaker negative impacts of parental absence on their cognitive and non-cognitive outcomes. And second, parent-child communication plays a more important role in reducing the negative impacts of parental absence compared to intergenerational supports from the grandparents. If we just go back to see this graph, you can see the magnitude of this changes is the effects of the effects of parent-child communication is greater than the living arrangements. And also, I didn't show the original regression table, the inverse probability regression table here. If you can see the coefficients, which is for the parent-child communication, is significantly larger compared to the living arrangements. even we do the mediation effects, which you're interested in. I can show you later about the mediation effects. Okay, so back to the implications, right? So what are the implications of the findings? The findings carry out important implications to think about the heterogeneity of parental absence. So on the one hand, we know that socioeconomic stress theory may overlook the fact that disadvantaged and marginalized parents can take deliberate actions and adopt coping strategies to nurture their children's development when facing social constraints. So family resilience is one way to think about the disadvantaged context. But however, family resilience appears to be an important mechanism can help to promote greater educational equality, especially the parent-child communication. So we should encourage parents to do that, even though they have no choice. They have to migrate to a different cities or different regions to find a job working there. However, we have to emphasize that it is not the cure to eliminate all the social structural constraints for disadvantaged and marginalized families, as the socioeconomic stress theory already showing that, right? Even though the negative impacts of parental absence is less, but still they have worse outcomes. Still, those children have worse cognitive and interpersonal skills and higher level of depression skills and delinquent behaviors. So finally, I have to remind that so what, right? So why this study is important. So what is the take-home messages we can learn from this study, and why should we care about the findings? I really want to push the audience to rethink the series and provide some explanations for the heterogeneous effects of parental absence. So the socioeconomic stress theory seems to rely on assumption of a deficit model, right? What I mean by deficit model is which they presume that the disadvantaged, the marginalized parents are less motivated and less likely to get involved in their children's education, since they are facing many structural barriers and lack of economic, social, and cultural resources. However, this might not be true, right? So even though they have less economic, social, and cultural resources, we know that the parents always want their children to be better, to have a better future, right? So this can be a supplement for the socioeconomic stress theory, the findings. However, I have to emphasize that, right? So I have to emphasize this because this may also overlook that from the resilience perspective, right? Even though they can develop different strategies to mobilize, to activate their limited resources to safeguard their children's education, however, they might fall into the trap of blaming the victims, right? So for example, parental involvement and engagement is not an easy solution for promoting educational equality, because we know that if we take into account this disruptive and stressful life events, the parents are actually really stressful. We cannot put a lot of responsibility and accountability just focus on parents, right? Because they're already facing a lot of discrimination, teacher bias, and unequal competition across different contexts for those families and those parents. So the origins of heterogeneity for parental absence are two-folded here, right? So the results really try to unpack this patterns. On the one hand, socioeconomic theory reveals this unequal responses to parental absence given the selection, given the self-selection into the parental absence. On the other hand, the family resilience theory helped to explain how individual responses may alter the consequences of parental absence. So not just the selection, but also their responses, right? So these two process happening at the same time to producing this heterogeneity. So finally, as you can see that we can see the photos right on the right-hand side is taken by one of my friends. He was a volunteer teaching in the high-poverty villages in Guizhou province back in almost 10 years, more than 10 years ago, almost 13 years ago, right? So one of the reason is we still see that there's a huge gap in the K-12 education, and also it's really important to improve the rural education in China because the parental absence, right? Because the parental absence have unequally impacts on children's lives. And also it was a collective endeavor among individuals, families, schools, and communities to form a clear responsibility. I mean, clear responsibility and also accountability that can help to reduce educational inequality. So we cannot just only focus on on the dysfunctional parents themselves. We also need to focus on the system, on our reward school system. How are they gonna can help those families, especially the kids, to succeed in school, right? So future research should continue to examine how different social structures and mechanisms can explain the equal impacts of parental absence across the different social contexts. Okay, so that's my presentation. I think I will end it here. Hope the internet is not is good, right? So everyone can follow me. Okay, so
okay, thank you. Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for this presentation. It is very interesting and has a lot of important implications for the education inequality in China. Okay, so Mu Zheng, you have a question, please.
Thank you, Angran, for this very interesting talk. Let me. So I don't know. I cannot start my video. And so anyway, yeah, I will try to start my. Somehow I cannot start my video, so I will speak up.
Yeah.
Okay,
oh yeah, I can
here.
see you. I can see you now.
Okay, thank you for this very interesting and very insightful study. And so actually I have three related questions. And the first one is, I guess I, in a way, understand your reviewer's concern, because I understand. Basically, I think I fully understand your motivation here, that you want to look at how, despite the heterogeneous nature in parental absence, how the parental absence per se may influence children's well-being. But still, I think regarding specifically to the like research design of heterogeneous treatment effects. And so basically, when we talk about a tendency, usually we will expect that the tendency can be like reflecting like a certain like linearly like captured characteristics of. So for example, in Yuxie's project on heterogeneous treatment effects of education. And so basically, it is the different tendency actually captures how those students are disadvantaged to a different extent in pursuing better education. And so in that regard, in your tendency to be absent from your parents, actually, there's no like a very universal direction that can be well predicted by your independent variables. And so, for example, those being absent from their parents due to migration can be, of course, about like less interactions with parents, less attention received from parents. But on the other hand, usually that comes with like a better financial conditions, right? Better financial investment in children's education. But on the other hand, divorce, on one hand, has been related to like a poorer like family dynamics, but meantime can be further disadvantaged due to this like a financial disadvantage due to divorce, especially if it's a mother who take custody of the children. And as a result, I think I'm still trying to like make sense of this latent tendency of parental absence here, because it seemed that there has been a further heterogeneity even upon the same level of tendency of parental absence, and that makes your sociological like interpretations very difficult, because we are not looking at the same group of children like with very comparable living social economic conditions, even though they may possess a similar tendency of parental absence. So yeah, I want to listen to your thoughts about that heterogeneity, like beyond the heterogeneity. And also secondly, regarding the resilience mechanisms, I think also related to my last question, besides those more social and interactive like mechanisms, definitely a socioeconomic mechanism is very important. And so still like related back to how those parental absence due to migration, divorce, might be like a word like this passing of parents might be very different, right? And so regarding how they can better or worse provide for the children's education, living, and so on. And as a result, like a very major resilient mechanism can be more socioeconomically oriented. And also thirdly, you mentioned that your parental absence is both parents absent, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I did some research using CEPS as well. I remember there are questions asking the co-residence status. So whether or not, like who is living together with you in your current household. I think that mother, father, siblings, grandparents, other relatives are all listed. And so probably you can also clarify a little bit on that, because like both parents absent, the influences can differ a lot according to which reference group you're looking at, right? And so many times due to like the gender socialization, if the parent, the child still gets to live with the mother, and usually the quality of life or the attention received won't change much. And so that comparison can also like host further heterogeneities in its own right. And but overall, it's I still find this a very refined and a very impactful research, and looking forward to its further development, and wish for its publication soon. Thank you.
Thank you for all the questions. I mean, they're a really great question. I kind of suspect that you're one of my reviewers.
No, I'm not.
I'm just kidding. Because you actually raised a lot of the same kind of concern. The other reviews that I've been, because I had a hard time. This is actually, I'll be honest, I had a hard time to reconcile this different comments. But definitely your first comments is really important. Like, how are you going to make sense of this tendency?
Yeah, the tendency, yeah.
Right. So how, especially given the selection. So I think one direction for the next stage I can go is I can just limit the sample, for example, just for the intact family. So the parents are married, not divorced. So in this way, you can clean up the the selection issues. But this is actually contradictory my original research idea, because my original research idea is look at how different factors influence this outcome, right? So parental absence is an outcome. So, but migration, divorce is just the reasons, right? The causes. So, but I kind of know that, if we taking into account a whole different lot of reasons, so the propensity score become uninterpretable.
Because you're capturing different children.
Exactly. So, but I look at the distribution of the propensity scores. One way you can look at the distribution score, the distribution of the propensity score by different key variables, and you can compare for different stratas to actually construct the profiles. What is the low strata? For the low propensity score, what the family looks like, and the high propensity, what the family looks like. So in this way, still is really complex because there's so many different factors. So it's really hard for us to comprehend what exactly you mean by a high propensity score of being parental absence, right? One way you can think about is, the most likely to be absent is the disadvantaged families. But when we talk about disadvantaged families, it's all have a lot of different meanings. So I realize that, and I don't have a clear solution for that. But
I think probably, as you just mentioned, you could just conduct like a set of robustness check, right? A robustness analysis, just conduct the same thing, like among those absent, like intact families, and those just due to migration, and just to compare to what extent that the effects are still there, still in the same direction, but different in size. And so I think that can be helpful, actually.
Exactly. So So I kind of want to turn into this project into 3 different papers right now, because given the data set, so the data set has an essential limitation. So originally I want to examine, because theoretically I think the impacts of divorce and the impacts of migration is different, right? So if I want to study the effects of divorce on children's development, that's a whole different topics. And also if I want to study the migration on on children's outcome is also another different context. But what I want trying to study is the condition. The absence is one condition, right? So divorce and migration contribute to this condition, and then this condition can actually impact children's outcomes. So you can have the sequence. It's a sequence of events leading to this outcome, and then producing different effects on children's development. But I have a dilemma to use the measurement, because in the CEPS, as you know, the measurement only tells you, okay, this is the condition, this is the outcome for parental absence. But we don't know whether it's contributed by divorce or whether it's contributed by migration, right? So this is a kind of essential limitation for that data set. And actually, I agree with you. I'm gonna definitely do the robustness check. Just look at the effects of divorce, or maybe look at the effects of migration, to look at how they impacts this, the results. The migration, I have done the analysis for the migration, is pretty much the same results. The divorce is a whole different story, because the selection for the divorce is a different. So maybe I'm gonna do next step to satisfy the reviewers' comments is I just focus on the married couples, right? The children whose their parents are still married. So that's the next direction I'm gonna go. But I don't want to give up that kind of idea that the divorce and the migration both contribute to the selection to the parental absence. But I think maybe this data won't help me to answer that kind of question. So I think I have to give up that kind of idea. But for your second question, is the
resilience.
Is the resilience, right?
So SES, yeah.
Yeah, so that part is a measurement issue. So I also encounter that kind of comments back, is how you're going to measure resilience, right? How you're going to actually unpack the relationship between resilience and SES, because the model itself cannot directly test the resilience. It's a measurement issue. Also, I blame the data. I always blame the data, because in the CEPS, we don't have measures for directly measure the family resilience. So that's one thing. I just assume that existed out there. So the analysis become pretty ad hoc analysis. I just using family resilience as a theory to explain the outcomes, the results, but not actually directly testing the resilience, because I don't have the measures, right? I don't have the measures in the CEPS to directly test the resilience theory. So that's the second question. I blame the data. So the third question is reference group, right? That is also a very, very great question. So I did a separate analysis, just compare both parents absent versus intact family. So you live with their parents, right? So the results remain the same. And also I did further analysis, just look at the paternal absence and the maternal absence. The patterns are kind of different, because the paternal absence and the maternal absence are directly influenced by the divorce patterns. So that story is a little bit tricky to interpret given my analysis so far. So I think that would be a separate paper, just talk about the different, maternal and the paternal absence, because the paternal and maternal absence, the dynamic is so different. You imagine the mom trying to, so it's totally different. So the both parents absent from home is kind of the most disadvantaged the families. They both work outside from different cities, or they divorced and then they work in different cities, right? So it's kind of a doubly disadvantaged group. So the only reason I focus on that group is because it's more clean. So the selection process is really clear for that kind of group. So, but I definitely agree with you. It matters what kind of reference group you want to compare, right? So, I think it's just a lot of things. A lot of stuff is going on. It's too ambitious to put everything into one paper. But I don't know. Maybe it will reject another time. I will change my mind.
But overall, it's a very important research question. Yeah, I do hope that it can be published sometime soon.
I wish we could have a better data to hack these patterns. But the CEPS is so far is the CEPS, right? So it's
I know. So for example, like parental absence definitely is a simplistic version, like regarding the time spent with parents, right? And so to what extent that parents around or not, like spending time with you or not influence your well-being. But that's blame the data again, right?
Yeah. So hopefully
Yeah,
we can hopefully we will have better data in the future. But but I have to say that my research question is important, but it's given the data that I just cannot fully answer the question. So yeah, that's so far what I got.
But
Thank you again for your
robustness
question.
analysis should be helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing the interesting work.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So are there any other questions? Okay, so then I have a question or a comment. Yeah, so I wonder whether you can, for example, develop more hypotheses to, especially regarding the interaction analysis. So I think the current hypotheses are very relatively simple, but the analysis is very complicated. I think probably this is the reason why the reviewers think it's quite difficult to interpret the hypothesis, interpret the result. But if we can, for example, develop more hypotheses at the in the literature review to guide the reviewers and kind of make them prepared for the analysis, that would be great. For example, you have mentioned there are two kind of factors. One is more socioeconomic structure factors. Another is more agency level, individual level factors. So I wonder whether we can develop some theoretical framework to expect, for example, when there's agency, but less structure barriers, and when there is more structure barriers and less agency or something. Do you think it's feasible? Or?
Yes, I think that's a pretty good suggestion. That's a great suggestion. So far I put a lot of energy on, just look at the empirical patterns, but I haven't really think through, to develop new theories or hypotheses to synthesize this different findings. But definitely, I kind of stopped there because right now I don't have a clear, thoughts in my mind but this is definitely, I think this is definitely can address a reviewer's concern, because you kind of mentioned that you can develop a new hypothesis, right, at the beginning to guide the readers to follow all these empirical findings later, because there's so many things, later it's hard to digest, right? But yeah, definitely. But I haven't figured out what kind of a new hypothesis I can draw from that, right? But I clear is like the conversation that I want to engage with is sociologists, and also the family scholars, right? So I want to engage the conversation with them to look at the socioeconomic stress theory and family resilience. Those are the two well-established theoretical arguments or perspectives. But maybe I can develop something new, right? Something new to combine them together. Maybe just context-driven theory or hypothesis to explain what's happening in China, and help the readers to better understand what I'm doing, right? But definitely, yeah, that's a great question. I need to think more to develop a new hypothesis or theories.
Yeah, so actually very simple. For example, you find that so the parent-child communication can mitigate the negative effects, and this is something you can hypothesize at the very beginning. So yeah, so then the reader will find it relatively easier to follow.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, great. And Jean, you also have a question. Yeah, please.
Yes. Thank you for the presentation. It's very, very impressive. My reaction is, treatment effects, these models are great, but I always feel dissatisfied about how to explain the relationship. Causality to me is not as important as the mediating mechanism. So it is clear actually from the family sociology literature that absence of parents are bad for kids, and that particularly if it's both parents are absent, right?
Mm-hmm.
And from even psychology literature and sociology literature, people have looked at both parents absent, mother, fathers, and we know that both parents absent are the worst. And we know that living with even one parent, not to mention no parent at all, in the Asian context is very different from United States, because particularly like you said, in China, you've got the massive migration, internal migration that is happening. So the absence can't be caused by divorce, actually less of that in China, more by migration. And we know that migration and divorce are correlated, although actually couples can get divorced first and then migrate, or the other way around. That we don't know very well. I think the worthy question is, these two causes of parental absence, either by migration or divorce, what are the different mechanisms that are causing the negative impact on children? So to me, causality is not very important, because we know with two parents missing, it's bad. But what are the difference between these two different causes? Some did not involve migration, but just divorce. Some do involve two, both migration and divorce, and some only migration and no divorce. To tease out these are more important to me. Whether it's for the divorce part, most of that, at least half of this reason is coming from the income loss, especially single moms with children. Is it that, or is it the lack of social capital? Or is that because they moved to a different place? And in China context, again, you're involving grandparents in the picture. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Those are important questions for me. So I remember we've done a special issue maybe 10 years ago about growing up in single parent families, where papers from different countries have dealt with this. And so these questions are definitely very important. I think to me, in the Chinese context, given the body of literature that's out there already, it would be really nice to know a bit more about the mechanisms why these two different causes may be different. So I wonder if you have done any mediating analysis or some kind of the other ways to try to understand the mechanisms of these different impact.
Yes, that's a great question. So for the mechanism, so first, I definitely agree that the mechanism try to explain the effect of divorce and the migration is different. So that's kind of the motivation of my original research, question. I want to compare, whether is divorce matters more or migration matters more to cause this parental absence and then leading to children's outcomes. So that's my original thoughts. But then I realized the data have some kind of limitation. I cannot, unpack that kind of, dilemma. So, but I do run some kind of a mediation analysis to compare, the parent-child communication versus the living with grandparents, which one explains the effects of absence on children's outcomes. The parent-child communication actually explains more. I did some KHB decomposition, try to look at how the impacts that. But for the heterogeneous effects part of the story, I still got confused because, like you said, you don't care about the causation. Definitely, I agree with you, because in this case, we all know that it's bad for children, right? And we don't need to prove that it's bad. We need to know why it is bad for children's development. Then I encountered the problem is I cannot separate the impacts of divorce versus migration. Just like we said, you touch a really, really important a thing is, whether the divorce first and the migrant first, and whether it's interact with each other, and what are the mechanisms behind that. And I think the time, if they have multiple waves of data that can track the change of the families. So especially the family history, when their parents get divorced and when they migrate, if we have that kind of data, I think it will be really, really good to look at the different mechanisms, especially in Chinese context, because I think Chinese context is definitely different from the US, from the other countries, because here we have rising divorce rate, but also migration rate. So those two forces are interacting with each other, producing this, the variation in children's outcomes.
But are you, sorry, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just go ahead. Yeah, just go ahead, yeah.
I was wondering if you were able to identify those who were divorced but have not really do this, especially the rural-urban migration. So just divorce, and then
no. So
migrate.
Unfortunately, I can't because the sample size for the divorce is only 6.6% in the sample, and it's a small. And even account for the migration, I cannot know whether it's a divorce and then migrate or whether it's migrate and then divorce. So, yeah.
No, I'm trying to see. It sounds like you don't have enough sample size.
Yes.
To just look at those who were divorced, but they have not migrated. The urban sample mostly.
Yeah.
And then the other way around, but it sounds like it has not, you don't have the sample size. I have other comments. It is resilience. Usually, nobody measures resilience directly. So you have to define what kind of resilience you're talking about.
Yeah.
And then use the measures you have to define what you're talking about. Resilient means bouncing back from adversity. So there first have to have some adversity for you to identify that.
Okay.
That would involve a different sample.
Yes.
You sort of cannot. Well, so just the point that nobody really measured resilient directly. It depends on how you want to define it. And there's the resiliency, there's the psychological resiliency, and different kind of resiliency. So that's probably something it's going to be hard for you to, while you're dealing with so many issues already, to have that also in there. Because probably require different sample size. That's my take. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all the great questions. I mean, it's definitely really helpful to help me to think about that, because so far I got all the feedback so far I got is to push me to think about the different directions right now, because I have so many things on the same plate. I maybe just want to focus on one task at the same time. Just look at for example migration, or just look at not think about the resilience put in the resilience in the same paper, because it's too much in the same paper. But you're definitely right. So resilience is hard to define. First, I have to define it, and then I have to think of a way to measure it using a different sample, because especially for the really dysfunctional children. And we know that we have a school here in China, just for the students, their parents have a really dysfunctional background. So their parents are on drugs or in prison, incarceration. So those kind of families are maybe the sample which I'm going to looking for to study resilience. But definitely you're making a really a great argument about the causation, which I definitely agree with that. And also the mechanisms behind the scene, which is more important. And also the resilience, I have to really think about that. But thank you for all your suggestions. I learned a lot from that. Yeah.
Great work. Keep going.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, and I also want to make a very minor comments about the family resilience. Yeah, actually, so if you start with the very big concept, family resilience, and use a relatively narrow measure to variable to measure it, then reviewers will have problems. But I wonder whether you can start with a relatively narrow concept such as family support or something like that, and then you can also use family resilience theory to prove why support is important. Yeah, I think maybe that is better. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
okay,
thank
so
you for that suggestion. Yeah, you actually providing two really practical suggestions for me to improve my framing. I mean definitely that's one thing I think I should do. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah. So if
Thank you.
there are no any other questions, so then this will be the end of our seminar. So please join me to thank Dr. Li today again for his very interesting and inspiring presentation. And please continue to pay attention to our CFPR events. Okay, so thank you very much again, and have a nice weekend again. Yeah,
Thank you all.
thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Senhu.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.